For the interest of time, let's get going. So hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the virtual community M Room. It's been fantastic so far engaging with you all this fall semester. And we are very excited to have a dear friend and colleague join us today for this really fantastic conversation. So with us today, we have Monica Carson, who's the Associate Director of Residence Life here at Lehigh. And she is going to guide us through a facilitated conversation on the cost of living in America, the housing crisis. And this is based out of a report that comes out every year called Out of Reach. And so we're going to engage on this conversation. And I know that Monica has some exciting things, interactive activities for us. And just one more thing, we are being joining today both virtually and in hybrid mode. So you will see that some of the participants are in our physical M room here on campus. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Clara. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. Greatly appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before folks came on, I was telling Clara, going through the report, reviewing the data, took me back to graduate school, and I haven't had to do something like this in a while. So I had a little bit of nostalgia. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick intro as to why I had interest in this specific area and why I wanted to engage in conversation with colleagues at Lehigh about the current housing crisis that the country's experiencing. As Clara stated, Monica Carson utilized she, her pronouns, have been at Lehigh for 3 years. I'm going into my 4th academic year so far. Prior to my work prior to working in higher education, I actually started my career working in the nonprofit sector with a variety of social service agencies in the Philadelphia area, working in rapid rehousing, working with folks who were in recovery, helping them find housing, things like that. So I am always in loop with the Out of Reach report, just because it's a lot of work goes into it and not a lot of people know about it and know about the information that they provide. So originally this conversation was going to focus on food insecurity, but Clara sent me the email, and the day after she sent the email to me, the report came out. When I read the report, I told her, I was like, wait, no, we have to engage in conversation on this, mainly because the Lehigh, Bethlehem, Allenton area is at the core of some of the things that are happening. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. So with that being said, I wanted to start this off with a game of Kahoot. I have about 12 questions that pulls information from the report just to get a sense of where people are at. Please do not feel nervous, because as I was putting it together, I was like, wow, this is more alarming than I thought. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so that we can get started. Okay. All right. Share devices. So you have to go to, you can join the group via the www.kahoot.it. And once you get there, you're inputting this game pin. Mm-hmm. And I'll give folks another minute to get in, and then I'll get the quiz started. All right, we are going to get started now. And for folks who aren't familiar with Kahoot, you have a couple of moments to read the prompt, and then there's 30 or 20 seconds you have to answer the question.
Monica, would you mind reading out the questions each time they come up?
Absolutely, yeah.
All
I
right,
can do that.
thank you.
Okay. So Juan is in the lead right now. The U.S. has a shortage of blank affordable and available rental homes for extremely low income renters households. $7.4 million. Okay, yeah. Juan is still at the top. Clara's coming. Number 3, what percentage of renters earn less than 20K a year? What percentage of renters earn less than 20K a year? And this is on a national level. %31 of renters earn less than 20K a year. All righty. Which of the following groups' involvement is needed to help solve the affordable housing crisis? All of the above. Great job, everyone. Okay. True or false, the federal minimum wage is currently $9.75. True or false, the federal minimum wage is currently $9.75. That is false. We are still sitting at $7.25, people. $7.25. Number 6, a minimum wage employee can afford a 1-bedroom rental in what percentage of counties in America? Just 7%. Okay. True or false, Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton has the third highest housing wage in the state of Pennsylvania. Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton has the third highest housing wage in the state of Pennsylvania. And the housing wage is ideally how much a person would need to earn to be able to afford the modest one-bedroom apartment. That is true. We're number 3 behind Philadelphia, and I can't think about the county off the top of my head, but it's like the Pocono area closest to New York, that county. Okay. Question number 8, the hourly wage necessary to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in the Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton area is? Great job. Yeah, 2190. Okay. 9, in Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is? $1,139. And fair market rent is pretty modest. We're not talking luxury apartment buildings and things like that. These are just what the what HUD deems as modest and quality living environment. Okay. True or false, Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, fiscal year 2021, area median income is $81,900. It's true. The current median income for the area is $81,900. And I'll chat about that more in a little bit, but I think that was the most shocking when I went through the data. 11, during the period of March 2020 and May 2021, the median rent in the Allentown, Bethlehem area increased by? It increased by 18%. All right, one more question. Rem is in the lead right now. Okay. Lehigh County home values have gone up 20.1% over the past year. True or false? That is true. And our winner is way to go, Tara. Thank you all so much for entertaining that.
You should hear the M room. There's roars and they were really getting into the game.
So definitely want to get started by just getting initial feedback, thoughts based on that questionnaire, survey, quiz. Just want to get some initial thoughts on what people, anything that surprised you, what didn't, things that you may have expected or didn't expect.
Okay.
You're good. Go.
So can we talk about that median income right quick?
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say
I
that.
don't know about the rest of y'all, but I was like, what the?
What?
That was
Yeah.
wild. I mean, I only really know South Bethlehem numbers. So when that came up, I was like, Monica, come on. And when that was true, I was blown away. I cannot believe that that is Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton.
And
Yeah.
is that, I'm thinking that that's a data point that we should be utilizing in salary negotiations, because
Absolutely. And someone just posted, Tara posted a comment. I'm very surprised about the median salary amount in the Lehigh Valley. What jobs are these? That, like, I think as I was going through the report, that was the piece that was in my head, because when you look at the Valley jobs, most of them are industry-based, warehouses, retail, and so on. What has happened, I'm pretty sure folks on this call will be familiar, what has happened over the course of COVID, we have seen an influx of migrants from the New York City area, the Philadelphia area, because people have the ability to work from home. So these increasing prices and numbers that we're seeing, they're not because of people who are like native to the Lehigh Valley are getting salary increases. It's because of these like influxes we're getting from specifically the New York City area that are making New York City type salary, but are now living in the Lehigh Valley. So just as a point as to like, where are these like jobs coming from? They're not, most of them aren't based here in the Lehigh Valley.
A good question that's coming in through the chat is this a household income or individual?
They do it by household. So this is a household income, not individual. Yeah. But when you look at the numbers for the households that are relocating to the Allentown, Bethlehem area, they're not multi-family households. These are like young professionals that are looking to get a decrease in their monthly like housing expenditure. Okay. Any other thoughts before I transition over to my actual presentation?
Monica, I didn't find it extremely surprising as far as, you know, the percentage numbers, because we know most especially during this pandemic, everything's gone through the roof.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, people have sold their homes and you can't find an apartment right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Claire and I had this conversation. I recently got a promotion in my department. My prior job that I had required, like I lived on campus. So this was the first time that I navigated the Lehigh Valley rental market. And there was an apartment I had looked at in May that was at one price point, went back to that apartment complex in July, and the price had increased by $200 because of demand. And I was just like, cool. And I asked the lady, I was like, so can you tell me where people who make minimum wage live in this area? Because of all the prices you all have listed, there's no way anyone can afford the moderate like one bedroom apartment just on a minimum wage salary. You have to have multiple jobs, right? So then we get into some added conversation, which I'm going to jump into now because I don't want to get ahead of myself. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes to go through highlights of the report. The report is about like 80 something pages long. So they go into detail, provide data about the entire nation. It's broken down by state. So you get to have information based on like the specific state that you live in. I went in and took out some things that were pertinent for us to know, or I feel for us to know on a national level, and then pulled some information based on Pennsylvania, and then came down to the Lehigh Valley specific area. So just gonna go through that, take 10 minutes, and then I'll come back. I have some processing questions for us to engage in conversation about housing affordability for us, our community, and also the direction in which the direction in which like the nation's heading with the current housing crisis that we have that isn't being talked about in the media and things like that. So. Okay. So before I go into detail about that, I just want to provide some information on the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. It was established in 1974. It is dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. It provides up-to-date information, formulates policy, and educates the public on housing needs and the strategies for solutions. It doesn't live as a nonprofit organization. It doesn't live under a specific party, and they receive a lot of funding from corporate individual donations to be able to sustain themselves through the years. So the report, housing wage, is an estimate of the hourly wage full-time workers must earn to afford a rental home at HUD's fair market rent without spending more than 30% of their income. Fair market rents are estimate of what a person moving today can expect to pay for a modestly priced rental home in a given area. The kind of home that can be rented for the fair market rent is in decent condition, but it's not luxury housing. The 2021 national housing wage for the 2021 national housing wage is $24.90 per hour for a modest 2-bedroom rental home and $20.40 per hour for a modest 1-bedroom rental home. The federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour falls well short of both of the 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom national housing wages because of the federal minimum wage. Because the federal minimum wage does not rise automatically with inflation, it is worth considerably less today than it was worth in recent decades. If the minimum wage had increased at the rate of productivity growth, it would be over $21 per hour in 2021. And then I just wanted to highlight something. So Marsha Fudge, who's the current U.S. Secretary for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, she provided an introduction to the report, and I just pulled this out of there. She said, even before the pandemic, our nation had a shortage of 7 million affordable and available homes for renters with the lowest incomes. As a result, 70% of these households routinely spend more than half of their incomes on rent. They have little liability to save, and one emergency or unexpected expense could send them into homelessness. To make matters worse, 3 out of 4 very low income renters who are eligible for federal rental assistance do not receive it. And so to get started in terms of like the report data, just a quick overview, 1 in 4 renters households or 11 million households have extremely low incomes and cannot afford the rent. Household can either be singular, it can be multifamily. This is just generically based on like the census reporting that they have. Rent affordability for a family of 4 with a poverty level income is $663. 2021 2-bedroom fair market rent is $1,295, so almost like half of that. 2021 bedroom housing wage was $19.56. 2022 bedroom housing wage was $23.96. So even between 2020 and 2021, there's been an increase there. Wages needed to afford rent across the US. Obviously, you see California at $39.03. We have Pennsylvania at $19.95, and this has gone up slightly in 2021. These numbers are from 2020. New York City at $18.40. Sorry, New York at 3403, Maine at 2139, Texas at 2198. In 2021, the 2-bedroom national housing wage is $24.90. Rents are out of reach for many renters. So when we look at affordability based on what someone's earning, so rent affordability to an individual relying on SSI is $238. Rent affordability to a household with one full-time worker earning the minimum wage, that's $725, is $377. And just as a reminder, a 2-bedroom apartment is at about $1,200. Rent affordability to individual with average unemployment insurance benefit is $503. So there's been conversation about eviction pauses and assistance with rent availability during the pandemic. But for those people who lost their jobs during the pandemic and were getting unemployment benefits, the average rent affordability would have been $503. Rent affordability to a family of 4 with income at poverty level is $663. And then at the bottom, they have the 2021 1-bedroom fair market rent and the 2021 2-bedroom fair market rent. Hourly wage percentile versus 1 and 2-bedroom housing wages. And this is broken down between races, so Black, white, Latino. And if you start at the 10th percentile and work your way to the 70th percentile, you see there are significant changes as the income go up. 11 of the 20 largest occupations in the United States pays less than the housing wage. So starting at the bottom, food and beverage serving workers, $11.87. And again, if we look at the top, 1-bedroom is at $20.40, 2-bedroom is at $24.90. So most of these employees or occupations will require multiple jobs to be able to create safety net for themselves or just be able to afford rent. And now we get to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $137, which means in order to afford this level of rent and utilities without paying more than 30% of income on housing, a household must earn $3,458 monthly, which equates to $41,494 annually. At the bottom, you see most expensive areas, Pike County at the top, Philadelphia, Camden, Wilmington, and then Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton comes in third at $21.90. The bottom right-hand corner, I know it's pretty small, but it breaks down the housing affordability number for residents who are receiving subsidies from the government, and also based on the housing affordability rate. These are all based on Pennsylvania numbers compared to the national average. And this was the one that just struck me. Metros with the largest increases in median rent, March 2020 to May 2021. We have Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, PA at 18%. That's where I got that number from. So this is during the course of the pandemic. The year we were in a pandemic, rent still increased 18% across the table within this area. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and just, I think as we navigate these questions, realizing that we all come here with different identities that we hold, different experiences, we all come from different backgrounds in terms of how we were raised and so on. I created these questions to have some reflections on things we may remember growing up. I grew up in a single parent household. My mother had 3 jobs. I didn't get to have dinners with her because she was always off going to work. And I didn't understand then why she was always working. I used to complain about her not coming to games and things like that. But in my adult life, I now understand why she had to work multiple jobs, because living in New York City, she had to keep a roof over our head. So the questions that I created was more so having us reflect on the now, but also having us reflect on things we may not have realized growing up, and how that may impact the students that we work with, the community that we live in, the Southside community, right? There's a larger conversation here about our students venturing out into the South Bethlehem community, utilizing housing that is taken away from the people that live here, and what impact that's having on them, right? And as we think about expanding Lehigh population and bringing more students on board, where exactly are we going to put those students? while still giving dignity to the people that live here. So I foresee it as a problem as a person in res life. But again, that's where these questions came from. So I'm just gonna go back and share my screen. Please feel comfortable to mute yourself or unmute yourself and engage in the conversation. Before I do that, any initial, like anybody have anything to point out before I start the question? All right, great, okay. And you can go in whichever particular order. So review the questions that I have listed and you can just respond to one as you see fit. But the affordable housing conversation questions that I came up with are, to what extent are you and your family experiencing changes in housing costs and affordability? What changes related to housing costs do you see in your community? To what extent is housing affordability affecting your thinking or experience of the American dream? What percentage of your income does your housing cost? What is the impact on your life? How is housing affordability affecting your vision for your own future or the future of your community as you know it? And last, what would you like to see happen in your community or the country to begin addressing housing affordability?
Monica, I'll jump in if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was trying to be so quiet just to see if someone else would jump in.
No. And
my
what I would
extroverted
do,
heart can't handle the quiet.
I will try to unmute because I just like looking at people as we're engaging. And then once someone's done, I'll go back to the questions so folks can see. I'm also going to try to post it in the chat as well. But go ahead, Caroline, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, when I think of housing, I think it's like personal and work, right? But on the personal side, I think of, so like you stated, Monica, I'm the daughter of immigrants. My mom and I grew up in Miami, Florida, in a major city. My mom is one of those individuals that lives solely off of her Social Security. Her check is $1,100 a month and her rent is $900. And she makes $100 too much to qualify for any kind of housing support in Miami. So you can imagine the struggle that comes with, like, what, you know, and she says this all the time, like, if it wasn't, and we talk about this in immigrant communities and Black, brown communities, we talk about the reverse generational transfer of wealth. Typically in white communities, there's that generational transfer of wealth that, you know, people are like, I made it on my own, but, you know, my family helped me buy a house, or my parents bought me, you know, and all that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, generational transfer. And for immigrants in particular and Black and brown communities, it's like that reverse. If it wasn't for me, my mom would not have housing at all, right? And so I think about that on a personal level, right? And I think of, like, I don't think twice about it because how fortunate am I to be able to do that for my mom? And then I look at our community here, and we just received a grant in partnership with New Bethany Ministries. Our community schools just received a grant to have someone help with tenant needs because our Southside families are, during the pandemic, we had landlords that were saying your lease is up because they were never renewed, because they knew that they could kick people out of their houses and get more rent from other new people who are moving into the community.
Yeah, there's a loophole in the eviction process. Sorry.
Yes, huge loophole. And so it was impacting, and it still is impacting our Southside families. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm always at war with the developers in the Southside. So just that kind of stuff is just astounding to me. And that I've been doing this work now for 20 plus years, and the numbers just keep widening, right? Like, it is just like housing costs just keep going up and minimum wage does not go up at all. So that's it. I'll shut up now and give someone else a chance to chat.
Thank you, Caroline, I appreciate that. I posted the questions in the chat as well, but I'm gonna go back and just share my screen again, just so folks can see it.
I posted a comment that my son, who's a recent Lehigh grad, is just starting a new job in a week, and he's going to start looking for an apartment. So the information about the average cost is going to be very helpful to him because he has to get out of my house. But I'm thinking about how fortunate he is to be not saddled with student loan debt because I work here, and he was able to get through Lehigh without student loan debt. And the impact of that additional payment would significantly reduce the amount of money he would have to rent an apartment. So I'm also going to remind him of that, how fortunate he is that he has no debt that would really decrease his options.
Yeah, there's a event happening next Chad, is it next Thursday? When is it? The event down at the Steel Stat, the rink game?
Yep, the rink game. I think it's October 5th.
Okay.
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. It was developed by a group of folks that work, like do this type of work in terms of like housing advocacy. It's called the Rain Game, happening down at the Steel Stacks. But the reason why I mentioned this, Susan, is because you basically get assigned a salary, and there are different factors that are added, and you have to figure out how to like survive on that income. You play the game, and then afterwards there's a conversation. I would highly, if he's in this area, I highly recommend he go to that, just because it's so eye-opening, because you then have to consider, it's not just about affording rent, right? There are other factors that come into play, student loan, medical bill, all of the things that can lead to you becoming stressed and overwhelmed. But I highly recommend it, just as a quick plug. I can forward you the email when we're done with this.
Thanks. What's the national average, do you know, of what % of your salary is considered normal to pay for rent? Anybody know?
They have the
The formula should be less than 30% of your income should be
30,
used
okay.
for housing.
Okay.
The fact is that over 70 to 80% of for low income families
Right.
is what's used.
Absolutely.
So that number, the hourly wage breaks down to like $24.90 to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom that don't push you over that 30% limit.
Right.
But the reality that people who live in poverty are spending half, if not
Right.
more, of their income on rent. And that's them working multiple jobs, right? So imagine working 2-3 jobs and still having to spend half of your monthly earnings on rent. And then you put other factors in there, people having children and having to afford field trips and different things like that. And this is where I came in with my personal piece and reflecting, because I remember when I was in school, there were field trips and things I couldn't go on because my mother just didn't have it. So then when we think about being in the educational field and working with students that come from these intersectional backgrounds, coming to Lehigh, like what opportunities have you not had, or have you had that impact you existing here? So just, I mean, yeah.
I wanted to comment real quick on the American Dream question that you posed, because I think that that's something to really reflect on. You know, similar to your story and what Carolina shared, I come from a single parent household, immigrant family. And I remember growing up, that being such a big piece, my mom wanting to own a home, right? And working towards that home ownership. And I remember how many jobs she had to acquire to get to that level. And then finally owning the home, right? And purchasing a home, but still struggling so hard to keep up with the mortgage, to keep up with that dream, right? Of being a homeowner, and getting to a point where it wasn't sustainable, and having to then sell the home and go back to renting, and that deflation almost of like feeling like I failed in that American dream, right? And being so adamant about her children then continuing to pursue that dream. And so it just makes me reflect on how much pressure we put on ourselves with this idolized American dream of home ownership. But then even then, you know, we're not really able to always afford it. And even if we are renting, we're unable to afford it at times. And it's just so, you know, apart from the mobility piece, it's so draining on our spirits sometimes, knowing that that dream that we're supposed to be attaining is sometimes unattainable, right?
And Clara, also to add to that, the reality of the American dream is that it's not reflective of all of the identities that now exist in this country. Because when the concept of the American dream was first created, people like me weren't allowed to work in certain spaces or make certain income. So I think that is also a factor we have to consider, is that when we talk about the American dream, is there American dream? How can you redefine the American dream for yourself? And what does that look like for you and your family? So I think that's a very important piece to add.
I went through like the housing process a few months ago, like looking for a place to rent. And I looked at some of the numbers you talked about in terms of 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom apartments. And I think it's important to also talk about like quality of housing, because some of those houses, like they existed, right?
Mhm.
But between like the mice infestation, the lack of heater, and I'm from South Florida, so if there was no heater or the heater was not working, like that's a huge problem.
Mhm.
And then also like the reviews on how responsive people are to actually fixing things. So not just like the availability, but like what does it look like to get into housing that costs like that
Yep.
much, and what are you actually getting for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the coalition breaks down their definition of modest into like, this is modest. What we're defining as modest is the HUD regulations on what like quality rental housing is, which isn't up to like standards, honestly. But that's how they choose to define it. I 100% agree with you that some of these rentals shouldn't be, these properties shouldn't be rented. And the most recent incident I can think about is the recent storm we had, New York City getting flooded. Majority of the people that died were people living in poverty, living in basements that were being rented, that weren't up to code, and just don't have access to afford something more. So then they have to go out and find housing on their own, or lease housing from lease spaces that are not approved or are not up to code.
I've got to run to another meeting, but I just want a couple of things. I want to say first, thank you, Monica, for this presentation, this topic, right? Because I think a lot of times when we talk anti-racism or diversity, you know, we love to stay in sort of the interpersonal flowery side, right? How people think and what they say, and it's so bad. And yet not understanding that this is where the rubber meets the road. Right. And so if I can't afford my house, I can't afford the rent, I can't afford to put food on the table, I could really give a damn about, you know, what new book or what class or how people are feeling. Because when we talk about anti-racism, at the end of the day, we have to understand that it is a structural problem. It is an institutional problem. We're talking that level of power. We're talking that level of power. And so it's things like affordable housing that gives us, exactly to Carolina's point, how do we even get here, right? Well, we got here because folks had hundreds of years of generational wealth that they were able to transfer, while the rest of us are in this reverse model. That's how we get here. And so I thank you for that, but I also have to say that universities have a role to play too. And universities have figured out in their business model that acquiring property and renting it out at even more than the median range is a good way to get money into the doors, right? And so we have to question ourselves. So yes, that does generate money, but what does that say when we talk about being a good neighbor, right? What does that say when we talk about being an institution of transformational change? And so what would it mean for universities to buy up this property and turn them into affordable housing units for the community? Right?
Yeah.
That's another way of thinking about that. But unfortunately, universities I don't know if universities done that. Universities are not thinking about that, and they're thinking about how they make money off their property.
Yeah, they're on the developers, the developers side, and not like the advocacy social component side of things. One thing I have always found unique since I arrived at Lehigh is the off-campus housing market, specifically for our students, right? I'm not talking about the the current residents of the South Side. But some of our students will reserve housing for their junior and sophomore years before they even get here, right? So then there's another layer in there where you think about who's able to reserve these units and who's not. So when we talk about our like minoritized students, underrepresented students, they're not doing that. They're not like looking for housing until they have the physical cash in their hands. So they often live in units that fall within those spaces that are not up to code or don't have adequate standards because they can't, they get what's left over. So, and I think that's a like a piece that we have to tackle. And I know we're, Dr. Rick Hall, a group of us are going to go into conversation about just redefining the residential experience, whether that means increasing from a 2-year live-in residency to a 3-year, which will greatly help put some housing back into the Southside community. But I think that's a point that we don't talk about often that matters a great deal here, is that some of our students can afford to write a check for a 10th month or 12 month lease, where others can barely afford to pay their rent from month to month.
That month, yeah.
And also, a lot of the students who were renting off campus through the pandemic, the rents got jacked up tremendously. The landlords knew, I've got a property, no one's in it, but these kids want to come and live in Bethlehem and do their remote classes. The rents went up unbelievably high.
Yeah.
But there were still people who could afford it, Monica, you're right. There were still people who could write that check and still pay that higher rent. Yep. Yeah. And the sad thing is that once it goes up, it's not coming down. So like they took it up during the pandemic, but it's not coming back down, right? So, and I want to point out a question or a comment that I think Mel made. Yeah, not understanding why minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. That is that's a whole nother conversation. But what I can say at the end of this presentation, I have some books that are recommended as resources. There's one called The Color of Law. I highly recommend it because he goes into detail on that and talks more about just segregation in housing and how current policies and standards that we have in place prevent those things from happening. So just wanted to highlight that. And even a $15 minimum wage isn't enough to afford housing. It's still not high enough.
Yeah. Yes, Carolina, yes. Yes. Carolina said, if I'm not mistaken, we have only ever received merit raises at Lehigh, never a cost of living adjustment.
Yeah, I've been here 26 years, never got a cost of living adjustment.
Yeah, I've been here 20, never. But I think that to me is, think about what a disservice it is, and like the inequities in that too, of someone who has been here then 20 plus years, your merit raise is like minimal, versus if you hire someone new, they start off somewhere else. And I'm not saying let's take away from starting someone where they should be. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's just like, how can we kind of like stabilize that a little bit, would be my yelling into the abyss kind of a statement.
And not to get completely derailed, but in addition to the small merit raises, Carolina, as you know, healthcare goes up. It's gone up every year. And then parking, if you choose to pay for parking. So there's all these other little things that come into the equation that you get your merit, but then you've got all this other stuff. So yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, Christine, $15 was the thing to push for like 10 years ago. Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I get into just like reflection question, one point that I do want to make and not leave here without acknowledging. So in the book, The Color of Law, one of the things he talked about was just how at some point in the 1900s, so in like 50s, 60s, around there, there was this like exodus of white Americans from urban areas going into the suburbs, which then created the suburban community. Well, the opposite of that is happening right now, right? The same people that left the urban communities and went into the suburbs, either them or their children are now coming back into the urban communities, which then create the thing that we call gentrification. So, and I'm going to share a personal story. My sister lives in DC. She makes what one would consider an impeccable salary, but even on her salary, she struggled to buy a property over the last year because people were coming in and putting down 100,000, 50,000 over the asking price, where she just had a down payment and like money for closing and things like that. So I think that's a piece of this conversation we have to explore and really talk about our responsibility for care and community and acknowledge this factor that is existing where white people ran away from urban areas when Black people were migrating into them, but now they're coming back and taking over these community and is hijacking of the price. You go to Washington, DC, HP corridor, or even like we talk about Brooklyn or San Francisco, and even the Lehigh Valley, right? When you think metropolitan area, Lehigh Valley isn't the first thing that comes to mind, but there's also folks who are coming from like neighboring more rural areas to live here that didn't live here previously. So I hope as you leave here today, you're able to like engage in these conversations with your colleagues and family members, but it's impacting a lot of people. It's impacting people that we work with on a regular basis. When you look at the entry level salary at Lehigh, that don't meet the national rent affordability numbers. So some of our colleagues are having to work multiple jobs to be able to sustain themselves and their family. And another layer that I add to that, if you're leaving at 5 o'clock and I get to go home, go to the gym, go to dinner, and you're having to go to a second job, what impact does that have on your existence and your ability to show up here? Which boils down to why I wanted to have this conversation, just so that we're aware that these things are happening. Anybody have anything else before I transition into just reflections? Okay, so I'm just gonna take about 5 minutes to show you or to show these questions, and then we will close out. And feel free to answer whichever resonate with you, but the reflecting on the conversation questions that I have are, what was the most meaningful, valuable to you in this conversation? What learning, new understanding, or common ground was found on the topic? How has this conversation changed your perception of housing affordability in the Allentown, Bethlehem, Eastern area? And is there a next step you would like to take based upon the conversation we just had?
In terms of a next step session, if it's at all possible, could we do like a brainstorming session or another MROOM session about what can we do, right? Like we have all this information now and it's like, wow, this is worse even than I thought. I knew it was bad, but it's even worse than I thought. But do I just sit here helplessly with this information now, or like what can we do? You know, what from the small to the big, right? To writing to your congressman, to, you know, anything. If that's possible to have a follow-up, I would love that, because now I'm kind of like, I want to do something and I have no idea where I would even start.
Absolutely.
You know, I love that comment and question, because I think that that is at the core of what we want to try and do in these sessions, is really highlight these topics. So thank you so much, Monica, for being willing to do this and sharing such valuable information. And so what we do with this then is the next question, right? And so oftentimes we ask those who are coming in to speak to provide resources and solution-based types of ideas. And we can certainly build on this and provide another space to continue this conversation. I also find it valuable to then look at the other aspects of this out of reach report that could be very significant in conversation. So another thought was to bring a part 2 and talk about food insecurity, because that's another piece that I think is important for us to unpack. And so while we want want to do these brainstorming sessions, I think there's also a lot of value in adding layers to the conversation and bringing other parts that are also significant to find what are the resources and solutions that we can think of as well.
Can I give one suggestion regarding what the conversation, what Monica was talking about, that just really we should think about if we want to take any changes. We always say it starts from your home. So why can't we start from our own Lehigh University? Because I know there are like a lot of employees, it's very minimum wages, and how do they take care of their own families and how do they live? You know, just it's really painful to know that it's like a really good, excellent university, and the staff, they are struggling to come through that. And the students after first year and second year, it's very difficult for them to afford, because the parents, they will say that the students turn 18 or 19, they have to do by themselves. So I feel it like, from my point of view, why can't we just, you know, start from our own unit to see what we can do, the improvements for that.
Absolutely. I am going to share my screen quickly. Just wanted to offer these resources as we're closing out. And Clara, I'll send the presentation to you so you can send it out. Books, as I stated earlier, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Reinstein. Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. Golden Gates, Fighting for Housing in America. And then Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Home Ownership. Have read all of these, highly recommend them. They're great educational tools to just continue the conversation. And in terms of local organizations, Lehigh County Housing Authority, they have connections to local nonprofit that assist people in securing affordable housing. Valley Youth House, I actually used to work for them. They're based out of the Lehigh Valley. They provide housing to adolescents that are homeless, and also have a variety of other community-based services. They also always have opportunities for volunteer. And then Habitat for Humanity of the Lehigh Valley, if you're interested in giving some volunteer hours to assist in building homes for people that are underserved or just have a hard time meeting the need of home ownership on the income that they have. And then the last one is Neighborhood Housing Services of the Lehigh Valley, who also have resources that are available on affordable housing in Lehigh Valley, and also connecting to food pantries and a variety of other local organizations. But thank you all so much for being here, Clara. I am happy to continue the conversation, and we can rotate it around in terms of who's hosting and who's leading, but I have greatly appreciated being in conversation with you all, and I hope this information was informative.
Yeah, absolutely, Monica. Thank you so much. This has given us so much food for thought. Sometimes we get so caught up in our everyday that these types of conversations kind of get lost. And so appreciate so much just taking this time today and really reflecting on not just how it's affecting us, but how it's affecting our community. And so I love that approach that you brought to us. Would definitely like to continue this conversation. Hopefully we can, as Christine mentioned, bring some motivation and try to figure out some solutions. And at the same time, the resources that you shared are so important for us to look into. So I'm going to encourage those of you who are here to really look into those resources, see how you as an individual can contribute to a solution to this societal problem. But thank you again for taking the time for presenting today. That was very informative and such a great conversation. And for all of you who are here today, thank you once again for joining us, and I hope that you can join us again next week and the following. We are going to be focusing in on topics of Latinx excellence for the next couple of weeks. And again, if you will have any topics that you would like to see in this space, please let us know. If you would like to facilitate a conversation, don't be intimidated. This is the type of thing that we would love to have our community participate in and share on things that they're very much wanting to see a conversation revolved around. So again, thank you, and we hope to see you again next week. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.